after my death. But as I'm still alive, I propose to go on living and enjoying it.
Was the first thing that came to your mind when you saw yourself?
Well, I think the older I get, the more interesting life becomes. So that in spite of deaths in my family, some 10 or 12 years ago, my life since then has been more interesting than ever before. That is to say, during my 80s. And I'm 92 now, and that interest continues. So the older I get, the more exciting and interesting life is, and the more varied.
The time I interviewed him for Morningside was really the first time I'd spent any extended time with him. We had been doing a series of 90-year-olds. Barker was cheating, but he was 91. But he seemed like a very young 91. And I think he's the only one of all the people we interviewed who talked about the future all the time. I find that so encouraging for me to talk to a man who's 91, who has his life still ahead of him. And it's true, because I learned, he's now 93, that in the intervening space since I talked to him, he got married. Now there's a man with a faith in the future.
I owe a great deal to Nan, who took my life over when I thought it was finished and made it good again. And I would like to be grateful to her as publicly as you like.
Barker and I are very, very close. We were right from the very first time I met him. I consider Barker my best friend, and I know he considers me his best friend. We're very secure with one another, emotionally and in every way, and very dependent. Barker's the most honest person I've ever met. It shows through in everything he does, his painting, his writing. In fact, he's honest to a point where he can be, it can be a fault. He's incapable of any, no, I won't say diplomacy, but he can be honest to a point where he can be cruel. I think a lot of people would agree with me who know Barker.
Barker Fairley is a challenging man, a deeply challenging man. A man who has enormous dignity, a tremendous physical presence, in spite of his great age. And I feel, like his fellow Yorkshireman, Henry Moore, that there is a deep rock strength, an enormous affection for his fellow human beings. But along with that, no tolerance of stupidity, no tolerance of guile, and a way of seeing through those things that I've rarely encountered in another human being.
The people have run amok tonight at the party. They're dancing to records dizzily romantic, clasping each other in ways that are more than hearty, thinking no doubt of capers yet more frantic. In the next room, to the twang of a ukulele, one sings about the styles that show the ankle. To a giddy heated group, contorted gaily, they echo unlike on rugs, while tinkle-tankle is heard the click of the ice in the whiskey corner, and the chuckle that goes with a certain type of story, likelier to touch Cape Horn than Little Jack Horner. There's two more heading towards the conservatory, and I, the host, guiltily misanthropic, steal up the stairs, dreading some new vagary or some more unrepressive change of topic, and wind my watch and water the canary.
Barker once told me that he wrote poetry, and I thought, oh, another poet. And then I read it, and it was brilliant poetry. And I asked Barker why he only wrote poetry for such a short time. And he said, well, no one ever told me to write more, so he dropped it. But they were brilliant poems. His painting, fortunately, received encouragement, and so Barker continued painting. I think it's the reason why he's doing some of his best work today. Everybody needs encouragement.
The world passed Barker Fairley by as a painter for much of his life. But of course, recently it has acknowledged him very significantly. And he didn't press his paintings upon the world. I think the world gradually came to him.
To me with surprise. Some of the landscapes are a great surprise. Most of the portraits are not such a surprise, partly because I've seen them in the interval. And it's when they disappear for 20 years that they are a surprise.
The opening of a new exhibition. This is the gallery at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, celebrating almost half a century of the artist's work.
Never seen him in a tie, have you?
No, I don't think so.
Something to recognize the importance of the occasion.
Barker?
I'm so glad to see you again.
You've got lots of friends here from the county. The Clarksons are here.
Since I have known this crowded loneliness in places where so many are coming and going, these overconscious wants and thoughts that press, this subtle loneliness of overflowing, I almost wish for life more plain, more crude, to curb my heart's excess and make me harden, and envy Adam's ignorant solitude, his callow feet astray in the world's garden.
When Barker Fairley paints landscape, he first goes out with a masonite board coated with paint and does a charcoal drawing. He then takes that panel back to his studio, it may be a temporary studio at the field, and fixes the charcoal with a brush and then paints over that in the studio. So his paintings of landscape, like many great landscape painters such as Turner, are recollected within the studio, not done from nature. And unlike the portraits which are done hot off the subject, the landscapes, in a sense, are done in tranquility. Very sophisticated, learned in the history of the art. And people who see in his work a naive approach are missing the essential Barker Fairley. Because Barker Fairley, as I say, was a student of the history of painting, a student of the work of other artists, a critic of their work, long before he touched the brush himself. And when he did come to it, it was with that full material, that full vocabulary to put down. And the fact that he decided to abridge that vocabulary, to truncate form, to distort it to his own means, often a minimal means, is an intellectual decision on his part, not a lack of knowledge on his part.
Even in his landscapes, he never loses sight of humanity. In every landscape, you'll see somewhere an abandoned barn, an old fence post, a broken down snake fence, evidence of man's presence there at one time.
He's not very much concerned with the wilder landscape of northern Ontario as his friends, the Group of Seven, were. He wants the more intimate, the more, if you like, Goethe-like, the more lyrical that belongs in the landscape that has been put there by man. And in that, I think, there is a self-portrait of Barker Fairley, because his main concern in literature and in art has been humanity.
Barker has the most peculiar magic circle of serenity that exists around him, and people go and sit at Barker's feet just to partake of that atmosphere. He has a sort of healing ability. It's nothing he does, it's his absolute self-containment that makes people feel good to be around him.
Well, I suppose the most interesting thing in life is meeting people. That's more important and exciting and fruitful than anything else. Painting is secondary.
He needs people, and people warm to him. And so he'll speak to people on streetcars and on buses and on the streets. He'll say, "Come and sit for me. You have an interesting face," to perhaps some shy little girl sitting in the subway. She'll be stunned at first, but you can't help but react to Barker. They respond. Canadians aren't easy, are they, with strangers? But they respond to Barker. You just can't help it.
And Barker Fairley, if nothing else, shows us what the individual, what the personality of Canadians has been, particularly in his portraits. As a portrait painter, I think he will have a very significant position in Canadian painting. It will not be an easy role for him to get because his sitters didn't normally enjoy his work. They were too critical, too penetrating, too frank for the average person. But once in a while, he can be exceedingly gentle, almost always with women. And one of the few of his portraits in which he exhibits a smile is in a study that he did of a very great friend from Manchester. The woman who first brought Barker Fairley to painting in oil was Barbara Niven. And in this portrait, with his Mona Lisa type smile, I think he has done one of the finest portraits of a woman by any Canadian artist. Well, Manchester probably was the turning point in your entire career. That's what I feel looking at the development of your work. The watercolors themselves are delightful, the early watercolors, starting with the mailbox. But as you developed in Manchester into the portraiture, which became certainly one of your profound
more
mediums.
important to me
I think
altogether.
So.
I think mankind is more important than rocks and stones and trees.
But you did wonderful portraits of the Manchester canals.
Yes.
Which have human overtones.
Yes.
You also did a few, I might call genre paintings when you were in Manchester, two in particular, of figures and cityscape.
And those factory towns in England were very depressing in those days. They've cleaned them up since. And I think my dismay at the poverty and the dirtiness of those old cities is what I try to express. I think one part of my nature leans towards the very severe and tragic, and I get that every now and then, though I don't dwell on it.
What surprises me is that you have not done more sociological paintings, if we could use that word.
Yeah.
Why haven't you continued in that direction?
I don't know. I ask myself, I don't know. If I followed my convictions, I should do more social pictures than I've done. But you remember that I started late in life and didn't want to adventure or experiment more than I had to. I wanted to paint the way that it came easiest to me. But you've asked a question there, quite rightly, that I can't quite answer.
But now you explore the human face in itself as a response, more than the human condition as a whole.
I've thought about personalities more than conditions, yes.
And this was, I think, your first portrait.
Yes, I did make an attempt the day before and wiped it off, so I don't count that one. The next day, the very next day, I did this, and it's with lines and flat areas, and that's the way I've painted ever since, refining on it in texture, but not essentially changing the approach, which is lines and flat areas.
And your daughter Joan was with you there, wasn't she?
Yes.
Yes, and you did a number of portraits of her there.
3 of her, yes.
Yes. I think this is one of the extremely handsome ones, which you did, I think, just before you came back.
I think so, and that's in my characteristic colors, two yellows and 2 neutrals, raw umber and white, and yellow ochre and chrome yellow.
All the inexpensive colors.
All the what?
All the inexpensive colors.
I didn't realize that.
And the long-lasting ones.
Very good.
But this one of her, which was earlier...
A little earlier, yes.
Surprising amount of color, and it's a completely different concept.
Well, I didn't give much thought to it. I painted visually. My personality and that of the sitter operate without being watched, so that I worked visually as far as I worked consciously. I was just looking and seeing a certain area that I wanted to depict and so on, not thinking about it, not philosophizing as I went on. But your personalities get involved. without your attending to anything of that nature. And you see, I work mainly with flat areas and lines. And I don't try to model or shade or in any way try to create a third dimension. The third dimension comes of itself if you don't think about it too much while you're painting. The face takes on the shape that you bestow it with, so to speak. I like a restricted palette better than a complete palette, I think the colours affect one another more when there aren't too many of them. So for better or for worse, I paint that way. So now, having got my drawing...
Now let me know what position you want me
Yeah,
to
it's your position.
Ready now?
Sure. I have to put a face colour down, you see. And that's very important. I want my red. Where's my red? That's it, I think, a little touch of red there. That's probably all the colour I need, unless a little blue later. There now. That looks like a queer colour to put down for the head, but when I've gone further, it will look different, better. So, 3 times out of 4, I can get a satisfactory result in one sitting, one day, one morning. But the other day I failed so badly that I shouldn't talk about it or flatter myself that I can always do it right. That's a strange colour, but it may be all right later. Another thing I've learned to do lately, recent years, is to use paper. I use a lot of paper. Instead of labouring that surface, I tone it down this way.
He paints in a way that, if his colors weren't so warm, could be legitimately referred to as starkly. However, there's so much warmth, there's so much of Barker's personality in the pictures that by some miracle, and I don't think this is entirely rational kind of thing to say, but by some miracle, the pictures are saved from being cold. They're saved from impersonality by the energy Barker infuses into each of his pictures.
I think in spite of his remarks that he's not an emotional painter, I find him very much of an emotional painter, an expressionist painter, particularly in the portraits, because he is distorting that face the way he wants to portray it.
Well, when you begin to paint, there are 2 of us, the painter and the sitter. Similarly here with this person here, there's somebody here, a third one. I feel strongly that this one takes over from us both. And this is the one that I'm completing. So this one takes over and has its claims over and above your appearance and my wishes. I rather think this comes alive now, that's what I mean, and then it has its claims. So I have to finish it on its terms more and more as I proceed. I'd rather paint life than paint portraits. That is to say, get a living person, whether it's a portrait or not, in the photographic sense. I feel that strongly. So that I end up with a lot of pictures that talk about life, whereas strictly a portrait painter gets a lot of portraits that don't add up together into anything.
His portraits are disturbing to some people. And I think the reason they are is because, again, he reduces people's personalities to their essentials. He strips them of any pretense, any veneer, and shows them as they really are. And he does it in a very simple way, with color, line, form. His portraits are essentially landscapes, too.
I may leave the face very much as it is. It comes to life. If it comes to life, it's a pity to destroy that. And I think it does. It's related to Nan without being a portrait of her. I've done her about a dozen times altogether, and some are very like her, and some are just as good and less like, but they're just as good from my point of view.
I always claim that Barker has had great serendipity through his life, but he has this ability to choose the things he can do, and he has always been a winner.
In some accidental, fortunate way, the right things chose me and I did them. So my life was very fortunate in that respect. For youth is slipping from me, and half the woe that burdens the world slips with it, and freely I breathe, young with the world's youth that the young cannot feel, light with the later buoyancy time cannot touch.
Barker knows who he is, unlike a great many people. He never looks back. He never doubts, really. He never doubts himself. That's what I mean when I say he has a strong sense of himself. He has great self-confidence, really.
I've painted the same way right along, really, from the very beginning. Some of my very best things were done quite early. I think everybody knows that I don't really care about so-called non-objective painting. I don't believe in it. I think that the visual arts are outgoing, objective, and you can't turn them into introspective opportunities. You can't paint your soul. You can express it in music, in poetry, in words, better, but you can't do it successfully in this medium, because the medium is outgoing, objective by nature. I believe that strongly. We've got weary of what we've had for the last 50 years, and now people are ready to receive new things. And although I'm a very old man, I'm not an old-fashioned painter. I'm a modern painter, even now.
Painting is that of a young man. Strong, vigorous, unhesitating. Maybe it's because he began painting late in life and he's just now in the first flush of his youth. But that's what it seems like to me.
Oh, I think it's the eye of a man in his 40s. I think he's a very mature painter who's really doing some of his best work today. Artists, unlike other people, don't seem to age in the same way. Their creativity just seems to strengthen as they get older.
He's an old man now, and he's painting with the kind of singleness of purpose and the kind of incisiveness of vision that only comes to someone who I think has achieved a certain kind of serenity, a certain kind of wisdom.
Well, I try not to think about the past. It often pains me. I'm happier not thinking about the past. So as far as I can, I follow my nose and my instincts and live in the present. Naturally, you look back, you have to. But I can make myself very unhappy by going back. Life will not let me grieve for what is gone, but gives me new distress to drive me on. The new distress cares nothing for the old. The old must wait till all the tale is told. When all is told, will there be time to grieve in quiet retrospect before I leave? Or if death takes me in unbroken strife, will there be leisure in the afterlife? I know when one of my children died, I have lost 3 children out of 5, which makes life harder than if it had never happened, doesn't it? I know I was with Margaret, my wife, then, and we stood and looked at his dead body, and Margaret said, "It isn't Bill." And we walked away from it. That was his mother, recognizing the real truth of the situation, that it was over. And this is the way to encounter your own death. Yeah. If you've done something worthwhile that lives after you, so much the better. I'd like to think that some of my books will be read by students when I'm not there, and that my paintings will be looked at by people who perhaps never knew about me. I take comfort in that thought. Nothing at the moment that I can think of saying. I will put it that way. No doubt I shall have a great deal to say tomorrow.
Next week, Spectrum presents an original television opera entitled Harvest.
I know who you are and what you do.
Bring these people a union.
This is CBC. On a quiet suburban street in California, a marital conflict is about to come to a head. This is a scene from Knots Landing, seen Thursdays at 7 here on London. But it reflects the dramas being played out daily in communities throughout North America. Marriage disintegration, alcoholism, the frustrations of youth. Problems we all encounter are the problems of Knots Landing. It makes for powerful viewing. Knots Landing, Thursdays at 7 here on London. Canada's flag. How proudly it flies, or does it? Has all the bitter controversies surrounding its design disappeared in the 16 years since its introduction? Is it flown according to protocol? Is it used in places it shouldn't be? And what significance have the Union Jack, the Red Ensign, and other flags we may encounter? Everything you wanted to know about the flag and more. A special feature of FYI, weekdays at 6 till February 6 here on London.
Many women could use makeup to greater advantage. Tomorrow, Morning Break gives you an opportunity to ask any questions you may have about your use of cosmetics.
You know, one of the ways you might brighten up these dreary winter days is with some new recipes in the kitchen. And tomorrow, we'll have a new soya and teriyaki sauce that you'll be able to see used in a broccoli and in a scallop recipe.
Beatlemania was a part of the 60s and is revisited by Morning Break. And we'll meet a woman whose business is dolls.
On Morning Break.
The new London Regional Art Gallery is now open, an architectural marvel hosting some of the greatest works of art. 9 galleries exhibiting spectacular works by such artists as Renoir, Picasso, Goya, Chagall, Toulouse-Lautrec, Bush, Chambers and Peale, over 50 major works and so many more. Make it a family day. Discover, explore, and enjoy the London Regional Art Gallery.
Al Waxman hosts another Circus International Sunday here on London.